Me. It's time for our weekly Bible study, and I am Carla with Race to Walk, and today we're going to be going over Job chapter 21 and his second response to Zophar. But before we get started, a little bit about this channel. Here we share good thoughts about good words, and on Fridays I host a live Bible study on Instagram at Race to Walk, and then I publish 2 videos a week. I publish a replay of that Bible study as well as a video about books. So if you're interested in either of those things, be sure to like the channel and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you can get updates on new videos. And if you've been watching these videos for a while and you're thinking I already have the bell hit for notifications, you might want to double check it, because I've actually noticed some of the channels I'm personally subscribed to, I don't have those notifications on anymore. YouTube kind of switched them, so go and double check that. But anyway, we are literally finally right in the middle of the book of Job. So there are 42 chapters total, and we are at chapter 21. So after today, we are going to officially be halfway through. So if you'd like to see any of the other Bible studies that I've done, you can go to my website at racetowalk.org /Bible-studies, and there will be a list of all the Bible studies I've done, as well as one that you can go to for the page on the book of Job, and that has all of the lessons that we've done so far. Job's response to Zophar. This one's kind of interesting. I think after we get through this lesson, we'll see one of the main points of this entire book, and it was kind of interesting when I went through it, and I was like, it was almost kind of like a revelation. It's like, okay, I see what the writer is doing here. So anyway, before we get started, let's just start this time with a prayer. Lord, we thank you so much for this time and for this day, Lord. We thank you for your presence of your Holy Spirit, who teaches us and guides us into all understanding. And so I plead the blood of Jesus over each person that listens, and rebuke every single thing that raises itself up against the knowledge of you. Give us eyes that can see you clearly, give us ears that can hear your voice, and give us a heart that is willing to seek after you. So, in Zophar's second response, which we went over last week, he is absolutely insistent that Job must have had some wrongdoings in his business dealings. So that is, we're not going to recap all of what Job's friends have been saying. There are three friends that came to Job in his time of need, and they weren't exactly always comforting. And we've talked about how we can sometimes be like Job's friends. You know, we need to be sensitive to the time that people are in, you know, and the situation that they're in. And sometimes maybe things do need to be said, but maybe not immediately or right away, or maybe even not for a long time. Sometimes people just need comfort and not condemnation, right? And so in his 3 friends, Eliphaz is saying that judgment comes for personal wrongdoing. Bildad's advice is that judgment can come because of wrongdoing in the family. And Zophar is talking about how there can be judgment for wrongdoing in business dealings or your endeavors. And we see in his first and second response that he is very, very insistent that something must have been kind of hinky in Job's dealings. And so Job is telling him, no, I'm innocent. He's been crying out to God, saying, God, if there's something that I've done wrong, show me what I've done. And so that second response, again, Zophar is very insistent about that. And so Job responds to him about this, and Zophar is basically saying that people get exactly what they deserve in life. So the fact that Job had everything and lost it all is evidence to Zophar that Job did something that deserved it, right? So I think a lot of times, you know, some of us can have the same sort of attitudes, that we can be absolutely certain that the reason that people are going through a particular time in a trial is because they brought something on, you know, they deserved it. And we do this both ways. So we think that people who have a lot, who are prosperous, who life seems to be easy, we equate that with righteousness, that they're doing the right thing, and so God's blessing them for that. And that if somebody doesn't have those things, then they deserve it. And actually, this idea is like pretty foundational to kind of how we see not only us in the church, but us as Americans. We think that because we have this prosperity that we are like this just nation, when a lot of times actually we're not. And John Locke, who was a writer of the Enlightenment, who wrote a lot about in his 2 treatises on government, he wrote about that everyone is equal before God, except for slaves. And he actually, if you go and you read it, it's pretty horrifying when you see like how he believes that these are these ideas of these inalienable rights, that we're given these rights by God. He calls on those, like that, thinking that that men have a right to gain property. His primary objective was to gain property. That's what Locke saw as the source of happiness. But he said that because they couldn't hold on to their property, that these slaves have given up their rights. And if you just read it, it's actually really disturbing. I've talked about this a couple times before. I did write part of this in an essay that I wrote for an unexpected journal on the ethics of the Matrix. And it got cut though. But anyway, this is true. People who have money think that they believe in law and order, but if they have wealth and power, that they believe that they're basically a law unto themselves and that they set their rules. So anyway, going back to Job, because this is going to play a role in what we're saying here. Job makes it really clear that there was no cause on his part, and he's been calling out to God. And I think that we can kind of look and say, okay, well, maybe there was on the part of his children. I don't know. That's my personal opinion, just kind of the way how those first chapters went down, that there was an open door there. One of the things that I think that the book of Job makes clear is that there's a lot more going on than just the whole dynamics between us and God, right? And so in the first chapters, it's pointing out in this unseen world, there's some dynamics going on there. That's in the first 2 chapters. And there's some other beings that are interfering with our business. And, when Daniel intercedes on behalf of his people, so, he was reading the words of the prophet Jeremiah, and Daniel realized that according to prophecy, that those 70 years were almost up. And so Daniel begins praying and asks God not to delay the blessing. And he's praying for 21 days. He doesn't have any, he's basically going on, cutting out kind of a detox diet almost, like he's cutting out anything with sweets, or he just has a vegetable fast, right? So water and vegetables. He doesn't have any alcohol or meat or anything. So anyway, he has this prayer for 21 days. And then an angel appears to him and said, Daniel, as soon as you started praying, I left to come, but that he was opposed by the Prince of Persia, which was the country where Daniel was at the time, and that this messenger from God was being opposed by this Prince of Persia for 21 days until Daniel's prince, which was Michael, the kind of this being that kind of oversees, almost like a guardian angel or a principality for nations. This is what it's talking about here. And he came to help him so this messenger could come and continue on to give Daniel the message. So we don't see a lot of this interaction in the Bible, but there's little glimpses here and there. And the book of Job begins with this. So we're told, that there's some other dynamics going on. This is just something that's interesting to think about and keep in mind. There is something to do with place and location, and these principalities that have authority over these locations. And that's not what our lesson is going to be about today, but I just think that this is something to keep in mind. And this isn't like we don't have to worry about this anymore. Paul writes in Ephesians, for we battle not against flesh and blood, but against powers, principalities, and spiritual forces of wickedness in high places. So there's still this interaction going on, right? Going back to Job, Zophar's correct in his confidence that in the end all will be called to account, right? And there is perfect and absolute divine judgment. But like us sometimes, he's looking at the end game as here. He had a very simplistic view of the circumstances and the dynamics of what were going on. And he looked at it as the sum total of the justice as what happened here. And that's not what it is. In the entirety of eternity, this is just a little brief moment. And this isn't where the injustice will come. We can pray for and plead for God's justice and mercy here, but in the end everyone will be called to account for their actions. and no one will get away with anything. But this life is not the end. Because of he's looking at in this shortened and simplistic view of what's going on, he misjudges Job. And he draws the wrong conclusions about Job's circumstances because Zophar isn't understanding everything that's going on. So we're going to start reading in chapter 21. And then this is verse 1. Then Job answered, "Listen carefully to my words. Let this be the consolation you offer me. Bear with me, and I will speak, and after I have spoken you may mock. Is my complaint against a man? If so, why should I not be impatient? Look at me and be appalled. Put your hands over your mouths, for when I think about this, I am terrified, and my body feels a shudder." So again, Job points out that Zophar should be having empathy for Job's dire circumstances. And then Job responds to Zophar's assertion that it is only the wicked that suffer. In verse 7, "Why do the wicked go on living, grow old, and even increase in power? Their children are firmly established in their presence, their offspring before their eyes. Their houses are safe and without fear. No rod of punishment from God is upon them. Their bulls breed without fail. Their cows calve and do not miscarry. They allow their children to run like a flock. Their little ones dance about. They sing to the accompaniment of tambourine and harp and make merry to the sound of the flute." So I think sometimes in our modern world, we're really detached from the reality of the processes of life and kind of the immediacy and the precariousness of life when you don't have a lot of control over things. So, we don't really understand everything that has to go into place into making the lifestyle that we enjoy come about. We just don't. And when we don't understand that, I think we miss the impact of words written in agrarian cultures that were in much earlier times that didn't have this autonomy over like nature and their lives. So he writes that their children are firmly established. Now, up until real recently, talking about in the course of human history, real recently, childbirth and childhood were really kind of precarious and dangerous periods of life. And so, like today, there's approximately 15 women die in childbirth out of every 100,000 live births. But just 100 years ago, it was 600 women out of every 100,000 live births. And then just a few hundred years before that, it was twice that. So about 1,200 women out of every 100,000 died in childbirth. So when Job is saying their children are firmly established, this is like, we just don't really get the concept of it. It's a lot safer to have children today than it was then. And then before modern medicine, about a quarter of infants died in their first year of life, and about half died in childhood. This is what Job is referring to. So today, that worldwide, that number is a little bit under 5%. And just think about the difference that modern medicine and clean water and sanitation make. Just think about that. That's just utterly amazing. Just living through childhood and growing to adulthood, improving so drastically. And that is what modern medicine and vaccinations and sanitation and clean water have done. It's just amazing. But think about that when you're reading the book of Job, because that's not the way it was in the time of Job. And Job is saying that's not always true. He is like, look at the wicked whose children are firmly established. And in verse 9, Job says that their houses are safe and without fear. And the word here in Hebrew is bayith. And it can mean tent or dwelling, like the physical structure where someone lives. But it's also very often used to refer to like family or the house of. And I think that rather than referring to like where they live, like their physical house, I think that it's a better fit that what Job is saying here, that their family line, their generations are firmly established. And, think about, again, we are like, don't really, put very much, importance on family or community in our culture, but we're kind of an anomaly, like not only in time, throughout time, but also even in the world today, like most other cultures have more respect and appreciation for family connections than we do in the U.S. We're just kind of weird in that sense. But here he's saying that they're firmly established, and this is really what assured, this longevity and this power and control, was having children, having people, because this family connection, there were obligations, blood obligations, to protect each other, to look out for their welfare, and it was ensured their safety and their alliances through marriage and through these generational lines. So then Job says that this dynastic security is also extending to their livestock, and Job writes that their bulls breed without fail, their cows calve and do not miscarry. So they have fertility and prosperity in every aspect of their lives. And this is something that we don't really get the impact of it at all. When your livelihood and your welfare depends on crops not failing or your livestock continuing to breed, we don't get that, because we go to the store and pick up food, and that's not the way it was then. When I was growing up, we lived on a farm and we had sheep. This is the thing, like, you have to have a ram that's fertile, in order to have these lambs. And this one year, there was some sort of virus that the sheep caught, and just lamb after lamb they lost, because the ewes kept dropping their lambs early, and they lost sheep after sheep. I mean, think about what that would be like if that's the entirety of your livelihood. And so this is what Job is saying. Their children aren't dying, and neither are their livestock, and they continue in security. And so we're going to read a little bit further here. And this is in verse 13. They live out their years in prosperity and go down to the grave in peace. So they say to God, turn away from us. We do not want to know your ways. Who is the Almighty that we should serve him? What would we gain if we were to pray to him? But their prosperity is not their own doing. The counsel of the wicked is far from me. So Job is describing someone who lives their entire life in prosperity, safety, and comfort. And they never once turn to God. And it's like, why do they need him? Anything that they see that the only reason they would pray to him is if they need something, and they have everything they need. He can't, in their mind, God can't give them anything that they don't already have. And they believe that they brought it all about themselves, that the safety is, their own act and their own works, and it's not, that God really can't do anything for them. We talked about this before. There's a lot of debate about the book of Job, whether it's a literal historical account of someone, when it was written, whether it's an actual, recounting actual event, or it's a literary apologetic work, like totally constructed. It contains truth. And this, I think it's very likely that whoever the writer of Job was, he had somebody specifically in mind that he's describing here. And I think that the writer was making a point about his life. And I have, if you go to the article on my website that has a post about this, I'm going to have a link to a citation about subversiveness. It's about Shakespeare, because Shakespeare made commentary on his culture through his works. And, art very often is subversive. And so people who don't have power, who can't come out and confront and say something directly, a lot of times you'll see this critique and this commentary come through in their art or their work, whether very, very often you see that in books, especially in countries where they have a very authoritarian culture where they can't speak out. You see that the writers will talk about, and they'll make a judgment on these oppressive rulers. And I think that's what's going on here. And so this is halfway through the book, right? And so there's all this drama. There's this narrative in the beginning. There's a fight between Job and his friends. And we get to halfway through. And we talked about in one of the first lessons that there's a chiastic structure here. So there's a pairing. And it gets to the point in the middle where there's a judgment against the wicked who are not being called to account. And then after this, the tone begins to shift. So this is what I think. I think that there's like, all of this is all that's come before. And I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm just saying that I think this here it was the message for the culture that the writer was in, and it was a condemnation of this wicked oppressor. That's what I think. And so we're going to see this. I'm going to read a little bit further, and I think this becomes obvious. And go down to verse 17. How often is the lamp of the wicked extinguished? How often does their misfortune come upon them? How often does God apportion pain to them in his anger? Or how often are they like straw before the wind, like chaff swept away by a whirlwind? So these are all rhetorical questions. And he's just asking Zophar, do you see this happening? You're saying the wicked always get called to account. Look around. Do you see this happening? This is what Job's saying. Verse 19, you may say, God stores up a man's punishment for his children. But instead let him repay the man himself, so that he may be humbled. Let his own eyes see his destruction. Let him drink the anger of the Almighty. For what is the interest in his home after his death, when the number of his months has been broken off? Can anyone teach God knowledge, since he judges those that are on high? So he's asking him, how often do you see the wicked get what they deserve? So in Zophar's first and second response, he highlights the fact that wrongdoing in business dealings and endeavors will bring about not only judgment on the wicked, but on their children, and that their children will have to, this judgment, this curse will continue on until the children repay and right the wrong. And it's not saying that this is not true. I mean, go and read in Deuteronomy chapter 28. There are generational curses, and it is true that this judgment and this curse will continue until it is atoned for. That can come about in different ways, right? So Job is just saying, hey, it looks to me like these wicked around here, they're doing just fine. They're not getting called to account. He's saying that the wicked should pay for their sins themselves. This shouldn't be generational, right? And that they should be called to account. And so I really think that he's referring to someone that both he and Zophar knew this powerful person, this powerful ruler in their area. And he's saying the rich and the powerful, look around, you can see that they do whatever they want, and that there's no recourse, there's no justice. They're not being called to account. And the same is true today, isn't it? So the powerful violate laws with impunity, and they get away with it. They're not called to account. The privileged get away with fraud and even insurrection, and nothing's done. Nobody stands up to him. No one stands up to him, even in our culture today. And so these are the situations that Job is referring to, right? And so looking solely at this time on earth, if this is all there is, then you would be right to say that there is no justice, because not everybody gets what they deserve. And we don't get to this in this point in chapter 21, but in the end, there will be justice, right? There will be justice, and everyone will be called to account. So let's go down to verse 23. One man dies in his full vigor, completely secure and prosperous, his body well nourished, and the marrow of his bones moist. And another man dies in bitterness of soul, never having tasted anything good. Together they lie down in the dust, and worms cover over them both. So Job is saying, in the end, the wicked and the righteous, the rich and the poor, those who live good lives and those who lived lives of misery, they all end the same way. Everyone will be food for worms, right? They're going to lie in the dust, and they're all going to die. And your money and your connections aren't going to help you out in that situation. You can't avoid it. All end in the same place. So the question is, what next, right? Okay, verse 27. Yes, I know what you're thinking, the schemes by which you would wrong me. For you say, where now is the nobleman's house, and where are the tents in which the wicked lived? Have you never questioned those who travel the roads? Do you not recognize their accounts, that the evil man is spared from the day of his misfortune, that he is delivered from the day of God's wrath? No one denounces his conduct to his face. No one repays him for what he has done. And when he is carried to the tombs and watch is kept over the funeral mound, the clods of the torrent valley are sweet to him. Behind him everyone follows in procession, and before him goes a countless throng. So how can you console me with your futile words? Nothing is left of your answers but deception. It sounds like he's talking about something specific, right? Something that they've seen. It sounds like it was somebody who acted with impunity, who was a wicked oppressor, and who was never called to account. And even in death, he's honored. And there seems to be no justice. And you know what? It's the same thing today. Like, he's saying that, Job points out that no one denounces his conduct to his face, and no one repays him for what he has done. People are still the same. People are cowards. They're out for their own self-interest. Everyone talks about how, corrupt everyone else is, and they completely overlook their own corruption and their own, self-serving dealing. They don't stand for truth. They don't try to make things right or correct wrongs. And they don't even see it. They're just as corrupt. But they think everybody else is a problem and are pointing fingers at them. Right? So, I'm not sure if knowing that people and their motivations are exactly the same today as they were in, thousands of years ago in the time of when Job was written. I don't know whether that's encouraging or discouraging. People are the same. We aren't worse. We're exactly the same. This is a human condition. This has always been the problem. Right? And so the summary of Job's second response to Zophar is, don't play me for a fool. Prosperity and power aren't always a reward for doing what's right. Sometimes the wicked live in power and prosperity too. And so I think that's something that we need to remember. And a lot of times people who have money and power see that as a justification, that they get to set the rules, and they feel like they're not accountable to God. And so we aren't getting to this in chapter 21, but we're going to, like I said, this is a turning point. This starts a shift. And regardless of whether you're in a position of power or you are the powerless, we have to remember that God is the one who will bring justice in the end. So we have to make sure that we're positioned to him, and that we are serving his truth and his plan, and that we lay ours down. Because, again, in the end, and Job and Zophar don't know the end yet, but in the end, all will be called to account. So anyway, that's enough for today. And let's just end this time with a prayer. Lord, we thank you for your goodness and your grace for us. We thank you, Lord, that we can trust you for your not only perfect justice, but your great and overwhelming mercy to us. You are so much better to us than we ever deserve. We thank you that you gave us the gift of your Son, and that you are pouring out your grace upon us. I pray for the favor and blessing of God over each person that listens. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, well, I will see you next week. Next week, we're going to be in Job chapter 22. So congratulations on reaching the halfway point in the book of Job with me. See you next time.